How we initiate a conversation matters. The way we set up a crucial conversation can determine whether we get great results or we create a whole new set of problems. The opening 30 seconds is critical. One of the best ways to start a crucial conversation is to start with your facts, share why those facts are a concern, and end with a question that invites someone else into dialogue. The other thing we need to do that is key is make sure we're clear on our goal. Our goal is to get better results. We get better results through a larger shared pool of meaning. And that shared pool of meaning we get from dialogue. Our goal is not to convince or compel. Instead, it's to speak up in a way that encourages someone else to share their view. And when they're sharing their view, we now have a shared pool of meaning, and we can get better results. Let me give you an example. So I have someone in my family who I care deeply about, who, from my perspective, makes poor financial decisions that hurt them. And when I've brought this up in the past, the dialogue has gone nowhere. In those conversations, my goal was to convince and compel. And as a result of my goal, my goal to convince and compel, all I got was resistance. They would shut down completely, they would stop talking, they would go out of the room, and they would even hang up on me. And the cost wasn't just that I wasn't having these crucial conversations well. The cost was that I was seeing someone I cared deeply for suffer, and I was personally experiencing the consequences of that suffering. Without dialogue, there was no shared pool of meaning. Instead, I just had my own individual, limited pool. And so I knew I needed a different approach. This time, instead of starting out with the goal of trying to convince or compel, I had the goal of trying to speak up in a way that would encourage them to add their meaning into the pool. So instead of sharing my opinions and my conclusion, as I did previously, which sounded something like, you're making really poor financial decisions, instead, I started out with my facts. I started out with just quoting them. I said, I heard you say you have this expense and this expense and this expense, and last month you had those and others. Then I shared why those facts were important and ended with an open-ended question. I'm concerned about the long-term consequences of those expenses and how that impacts your quality of life. I realize I'm only seeing this from my perspective, and I'd really like to hear it from yours and understand how you're coming to your conclusions. What's your view? And then they responded. And they said, oh, no, it's all right that I have all these expenses. It's right that I'm incurring all this loss, because at the end of the year, I can write this loss off on my taxes, and I'm really doing it for the tax deduction. And I'm thinking, what? You're justifying losing hundreds of dollars every month, sometimes thousands of dollars, to justify this tiny little tax savings, this tax deduction at the end of the year? The math doesn't add up. This makes no sense. But I stopped myself, and I instead said, I didn't realize that was your justification for the losses. How much are you saving at the end of the year through your tax deduction? And they said, oh, I don't know exactly, but it's a lot. And I said, well, could we sit down right now and figure out what that number is? Because I know you would love to have me off your back, and I would love to be off your back. And maybe if that number's big enough, I'd love to know it too, because maybe I'm missing out on some sort of savings. And it would just probably be a great number to know. And they said, yeah, I'd love to. They grabbed their files with gusto. They were ready to prove me wrong. And they got their calculator, they sat down, they got their pen out, and they were writing and calculating their numbers. And as they were doing that, I could sense their mood shift as they were adding up the numbers. And then I saw the blood kind of drain out of their face. And then I saw them come to their own conclusion that this savings at the end of the year was a fraction of what they were losing throughout the year. And they turned to me and they said, I think I really need to rethink some of my financial decisions, which was huge. Because previously, it was total resistance to any type of conversation. When you give up the goal of trying to convince and compel, you become more convincing. And what that means is that you confidently and humbly commit to speaking up in a way that encourages others to speak up. Now, I want to call out two words here, confident and humble. So when I said we want to give up the goal of trying to convince, I'm not saying we give up. We can still step up and speak up confidently. This is not about being nice or beating around the bush. This is about speaking up with confidence. But we've got to balance that confidence with humility. If I'm all confidence, no one's going to hear my message. And so how can I have the humility and bring that to the table? Well, the way we demonstrate humility in this opening is really in that open-ended question at the end of that 30 seconds. What that question does is it's basically saying, I have the humility to admit I might be missing something. And so I ask, what am I missing? Or I have the humility to admit that this is only my limited perspective. And so I ask, what's your perspective?